The topic for today is just continuing to look at our energy levels, and we're getting to the point where we can write, to know how to write electron configurations. So let's write electron configurations. So to start, let's talk about our energy levels, okay? That's what we were talking about last time. And when we think of energy levels, we need to be thinking of layers of electrons. Okay? To refresh what we were talking about yesterday, let me just try and sort of draw how it ends up happening. So the first thing that happens is that we have our first energy level. Let's choose a different color. Let's choose the color, I don't know, pink. So in our first energy level, and I'm using a color pink because it doesn't matter what color it is. I'm just using a color to help us visualize it. So it's different than the other colors I've used, but that's just because I don't want you to be thinking that these are actually a certain color. I just use the color to represent it. In our first energy level, our first layer of electrons, the only thing we have, and actually let me draw this a little over here. The only thing we have is an s orbital, right? It's just a single s orbital, and it can either have one electron. This would be the electron configuration for hydrogen. Hydrogen has only one electron. We would be done, right? If I said draw the electrons and the orbitals for hydrogen, this would be it. If I wanted to add another electron, there's still room in this orbital. There's space in here because each orbital can have 2 electrons. We've talked about that before. So if I put another electron in here, now I have the electron configuration for helium. Helium has 2 electrons. Okay? So that would be it. That's all I would need to write. So in the first energy level, I would just say that there are 2 electrons in the s orbital, right? And I'm going to take this and just bring it down here, and take this and bring it up a little bit. Oh, not like that. Not a different shape, just a different place. How can I grab this here? It doesn't want to be grabbed. Here we go. Maybe just make a little more space over here. Okay, so here are 2 electrons. Let's say I want to add a third electron. I can't put it in here, and it turns out that the first energy level, it doesn't have any other orbitals. This is it. So if I want to add a third electron, the only way I can do that is to go into a new, bigger energy level that's just going to eat this one. It's going to be bigger than this one. Let's draw this one in purple. We need to move into our second energy level. Well, our second energy level, we can just draw it like this. It starts off, our second energy level has different kinds of orbitals, but the third electron would just go into an s orbital, because that's the first thing that happens. Every time you go to a new energy level, the first thing that happens is that the s orbital gets filled. So our third electron would be right in there, right? This would be the electron configuration for lithium. Let me put an L on here. And so here we would say, oh, now it has 1 electron in the s orbital. Right? So far, this is what we've drawn. We have the 2 electrons in the first energy level that are both in the s orbital. That's all there is there. And then we have 1 electron now in the s orbital for our second energy level, right? But what if I want to add another electron? That's fine. You just add another electron into that same orbital, because each orbital can hold 2 electrons, right? So now I would come over here and say, no, I don't have just the 1 orbital. The 1 electron. I have 2 electrons now in the s orbital in my second energy level. Well, that's great. This would be the electron configuration for beryllium, but we're not done here either, right? We could keep going if we wanted to. Let's say I wanted to get another electron. Well, I can't put it in this s orbital anymore. It already has 2. I need to go into a new orbital. This energy level actually has p orbitals as well. So let me try to draw those in. Now, things are going to get really messy because Now I'm going to try to draw everything on here at the same time. So my p orbitals look like this. And, really the p orbitals are smaller than the s orbitals. Just for the sake of us not completely getting confused, let's just sort of draw them like bigger, because otherwise there's no way to, it's sort of like going inside there. That's what those dotted lines are. So we have 3 p orbitals. We always have 3 p orbitals, right? Here's the one coming in through here, and it goes sort of back here. So here are the 3 p orbitals in our second energy level, right? So if I wanted to add a third electron, I'm sorry, not a third electron, a fifth electron, we have the 2 on the inside from the first energy level. We have 2 in the s orbital for the second energy level. That fifth electron, it can't go into any of those orbitals now. It has to go into one of the p orbitals. So then I would say, oh, now I have 1 electron in the p orbitals. If I wanted to add a sixth electron, I would go into one of the other p orbitals. There it is, right? So now I would say, oh, now I have 2 electrons in the p orbitals. If I wanted to add a 7th electron, I would put it in the other p orbital right there, right? So now I would say, no, I don't have 2 electrons. I have 3 electrons in the p orbitals. If I wanted to add an 8th electron, another electron, I would have 4 electrons in the p orbitals. Now I've filled up this p orbital, right? I can't add any more there, but don't worry, there's still space. If I wanted to add another electron, I could add it in another p orbital, and there's still space right here. There's still space. Each orbital can hold 2 electrons. So if I wanted to add, not that. If I wanted to add another electron, I could add it right in here, and I would say I have 6 electrons in the p orbitals. Well, that's nice, but what if I wanted to add another electron? What if I wanted an 11th electron? There's no orbital in the second energy level where it fits. All of the orbitals have 2 electrons. They're completely full. They cannot add any more. Well, don't worry. We can actually keep going, because now we can just say, that's fine. We'll go to a new, even bigger energy level, right? And just, whoa, hold on a second. New, even bigger energy level. And we know that just like the energy levels before, we're going to start by filling an s orbital. That's the pattern. That's the beauty. It just follows a pattern. It does this again and again and again and again and again and again and again, on and on and on. It does have some more complex examples with some other kinds of orbitals, but for our class, we're just like, let's just look at this pattern. So if I wanted to add another electron, it would fill this s orbital, right? So I could say, oh, now I have 1 electron in the s orbital. In this giant s orbital, it's outside, it's surrounding all the other electrons we have had so far. If I wanted to add another electron, I can do it in that same big orbital, right? Because it can hold 2 electrons. So here, I would just say, no, this is actually 2 electrons. Well, now if I want to add another electron, I can't put another one in this orbital, right? Each orbital can only hold 2 electrons. But just like before, here's 1 p orbital, here's another p orbital, and here's another p orbital, right? So if I wanted to add another electron, I would add it to the p orbitals. So here it is. There we go. What if I wanted to add another electron? I would add it to another p orbital. Now this would be 2 electrons. What if I wanted to add another one? I would just do it to another p orbital, right? Like, how many times am I going to go through this? I would just say, now I have 3 electrons in the p orbitals. What if I wanted to add another electron? I can just keep going. Now I can fill one of these p orbitals. Now this vertical p orbital has 2 electrons. So that's great. I can say now I have 4 electrons in the p orbitals. What if I wanted to add another electron You guessed it. I just keep adding it to where there's space. There's still space. And look, there's still space over here. So I can add another electron here. Well, now we're full. This would be the electron configuration for argon, right? Because argon has, what is it? Argon has, how many electrons do we have so far? 2, 4, 10, 18. Argon has 18 electrons, right? And so you can tell that just by looking at your periodic table, right? Your periodic table, and it tells you how many protons and electrons as long as the atom is neutral. So these are my 18 electrons. I can tell you where every single one of those 18 electrons are. Guess what? We won't do it in this class, but let's say I was like, what if I want to add a 19th electron? Guess what you would do? You would just say like, great, I can do that, no problem. I'm just going to add another monster s orbital. You could do that. And then you could start filling in those electrons. Then once that one's full, you're like, let's just add some p orbitals, right? And actually then we start getting into really complex stuff because it turns out there's another kind of orbitals, but let's just leave it there. Let's not go too wild. Okay, let's just leave it at our third energy level. These are all the electrons that you can possibly have in the third energy level. Okay, that's what I want you to understand. Now, when we looked at our element activity cards, we looked at this here. We looked at this here, where you're just seeing the outside layer of all the electrons. Okay, we're seeing the outside layer here. But inside of this lithium are the 2 other electrons that we had already filled up, right? Lithium has 3 electrons. We only see 1 because inside of there are the other 2, right? Once we keep adding them, we fill that s orbital, and then we add a third one that goes into a p orbital, but our s orbital is still there in full. We add a 4th one to the second energy level, a 5th one to the second energy level, a 6th one to the second energy level, a 7th and an 8th ones, and we completely fill up our second energy level. Look, there's no more places to put electrons. Each orbital has 2. So if I wanted to add that an 11th electron, boom, I would go into my third energy level that is bigger. Then it just eats all of the other electrons. So all the other electrons, they're there. They're just on the inside, right? I had my 2 that I started with, and then I had filled another s orbital, and then I had filled some p orbitals, right? There's 2 in each of those. So there's all my electrons. They're inside of there. We just don't draw them because it's too complicated. It's too confusing to draw the whole thing. So that's why I show you just the outside layer. But you need to know how to tell me about all of the electrons in there. Okay? So let's do some more. Let's make our lives a tiny bit easier here. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to write all of this in a lot shorter way. All you have to do is you start by writing what energy level you're on. So, you start by writing what energy level you're on. Okay, hold on. There we go. My pens should be working now. So we always start at the inside and work our way out. So in our first energy level, we just write the number 1. We write what kind of orbital we're talking about. So here we would write S. And then you write how many electrons are in that orbital. You write it as a superscript. It looks like 1s squared, but we just say 1s2. There are 2 electrons in that first energy level, and they're in an s orbital. Okay? There's no more space in there. There are no p orbitals for the first energy level. So then, if we want to add more electrons, we have to talk about the second energy level. So then we would write 2, the second energy level. And the first 2 electrons went into that bigger s orbital, this purple one here, right? So we would write s, and it's filled up, so we would write 2. The next thing that we would write about is these 6 electrons. Well, we're still talking about in the second energy level, right? So now I'm going to write another 2 to say, hey, we're still in the second energy level. I'm going to write a P because it's the p orbitals, and there are 6 electrons in there. So far we have 1s2, 2s2, 2p6. Well, after that, if we want to add more electrons, that goes into our 3rd energy level, right? So we need to write the number 3. And we're going to write the type of orbital. First, we filled up the s orbital. That's how the pattern goes. You first fill up the s. So we're going to write s. And how many electrons are there in there? There are 2 electrons in that s orbital. Well, we kept going, right? We said that we were, oh, look, I've forgotten to write that there was actually 6 in here, right? Because we completely filled that up. So then we want to write about our p orbitals. Again, we have to say which layer we're talking about. We're talking about the 3rd layer, the 3rd energy level. We're talking about our p orbital. And how many electrons did it have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you could have written the electron configuration for our argon atom. This is the electron configuration for argon. Right there. That's it. Electron configuration for argon. Okay? So let's see how much easier that is to write than all of this stuff, right? It's a lot faster. So let's do some examples then. Let's write some electron configurations. So let me erase all of this. Hello, there we go. Let me erase all of this. And let's bring up both things here so it's sort of easier to see. Oh, maybe I won't be able to. Oh, here, I just have to make this smaller. Hold on. Bear with me for a moment. Okay. Here are our electron orbitals. So let's say I wanted to write the electron configuration. Let's say this. Actually, I'm going to delete this too. We don't need this anymore. Let me say write the electron configuration for, let's do boron. So boron is right here, okay? Ask yourself, how many electrons does boron have? Well, we know in a neutral atom of boron, we would have the same number of electrons as protons. So the answer here would be 5. So in total, we should have 5 electrons. When you're writing electron configurations, let me draw this down here. When you write electron configurations, start at the top left of the periodic table and quote unquote read it until you get to the atom you want. Let me just show you what I mean by that. Okay? So it says start at the top left, that's hydrogen. So I know that the first electron that I want would be in that s orbital, right? It's in the first period, my first energy level. So here's what I would do. So step 2, write the electron configuration. Right? And maybe I should just even put this up there because this is what we need to know in order to do this. So let's write our electron configuration down here. So start with my first energy level. So let me write 1, my first energy level. And in my first energy level, I only have an s orbital. So let me write s. Now, you might think, oh, I'll just write 1 here. But actually, really, if I'm going left to right and I'm reading it like a book, right? I would read this way and say, no, I actually have 2 electrons, because I have to keep doing this, keep reading it until I get all the way to boron. That's right here. So I'm gonna start here. Let me read across. So my first energy level, I have 2 electrons in the s orbital. So I would write 1s2. Let me keep reading. So now I'm in the second energy level. So I would write a 2. And the first thing that gets filled is my s orbital, right? And so I would write s. And how many, if I keep going, how many electrons end up in my s orbital? Well, only 2 can, because there's just one s orbital. So I'd write 2. And then I'm not done yet. Now I get to the p orbitals. So look, I'm in the second energy level still, so I'm going to write 2. But now I'm in the p orbitals, so let me write p. And there's only 1 electron in the p orbital. And that's it. That's boron. So I would just write 1. So this is the electron configuration for boron. We are done. That's all, right? So let's hopefully that makes sense. Let's do another example. So let me delete this too. Let me say, how many electrons does the atom, let me just do this. How many electrons, oh, come on. How many electrons does the atom have? So let's do it now for, let's do oxygen. Okay, so let's do oxygen. Oxygen. How many electrons does oxygen have? It needs to have 8. 8 electrons. Again, we're going to read it from left to right. In our first energy level, when I read from left to right, I haven't gotten to oxygen yet, so I'm just going to write down that I had 2 electrons in the s orbital. So I would write 1s2. Keep reading, then you go to the next line. I haven't gotten to oxygen yet, and I filled up this s orbital, so I'm going to write 2s2. Why? Why? Because I'm in the second energy level, that's this number 2. I'm talking about the s orbital, so that's the s, and then how many electrons? That's 2 electrons. Then I'm going to talk about the p orbitals, so I'm going to write the p orbitals on the second energy level. That's what I'm talking about now, so I write 2p. And then how many electrons are in my p orbitals? Here's 1, that would be boron. Add another one, that would get me to carbon. Add another one, that would get me to nitrogen. Add a 4th one, and here I am at oxygen. So I would write 4. Okay? Let's make sure that that makes sense. There are 2 electrons here, plus 2 more is 4, plus 4 is 8. That's it. I'm done. That's my electron configuration for oxygen. Let's do another one. Let's do aluminum. No, let's just do, no, we did argon. I can't decide. I don't know why. Let's just do calcium. Okay, let's do calcium. Let's do calcium. How many electrons does calcium have? It needs to have 12 electrons total, right? Let's read top to bottom, left to right. So up here, I'm in my first energy level. I haven't gotten to calcium yet, so I'm just going to write down that I've filled my whole first energy level, right? I had to in order to keep going. So I'm going to write 1s2. Why? Because I'm in the first energy level. I'm in an s orbital, and I have 2 electrons. Boom. Then I get to my second energy level. So I keep reading from left to right. I haven't gotten to calcium yet, and I filled up my s orbital. So I'm going to write 2s2. I filled up my s orbital. And then I keep going. I'm filling up p orbitals. I keep going. I'm going to read all the way to the end because I still haven't gotten to calcium. I filled all my p orbitals. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons. So I'm going to write 2p6. I'm still not done. Now, boom, I go to my next energy level. And I know that I'm in my s orbital. And to get to calcium, I have to fill my s orbital. So I have to have 2 electrons in that s orbital. And then I'm there. I'm not going to keep reading because I already got there. So now I'm going to write 3s2, third energy level. s orbital, and there are 2 in there. Okay? Let's do one more example. This is it. Oh, and let's just quickly make sure that makes sense. I have 2, 4, plus 6 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Yep, sure enough, I end up with 12 electrons total. Let's do one more. Let's do phosphorus. Phosphorus has, look over here, 15 electrons total. Okay, so start reading from top to bottom, left to right, just like a book. I filled my first shell, so I'm going to write down that I have 2 electrons in my s orbital in the first energy level. I do that by writing 1 for the first energy level, s for the type of orbital, and it has 2 electrons. It's full. Then I keep reading. The next thing that happened is I filled my s orbital on my second energy level. So I'm going to write 2 for the energy level. I'm going to write that it's an s orbital, and I filled it too, right? Because look, phosphorus is way down here. We got to keep reading. I'm going to keep reading left and right. Now I'm filling up my p orbitals, and I got to the end. I still haven't gotten to phosphorus, so now I'm going to write that I completed the I filled the p orbitals here. So in my second energy level, I had my p orbitals, and I filled them. How many electrons did I need to fill it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons, right? We're not done yet. Let's go to the next energy level. We're in the third energy level now. And I'm going to fill my s orbital first. I have 2 electrons in those orbitals. And we got to keep going, right? We have to keep reading. Now we add 1 electron to the p orbitals, 2 electrons to the p orbitals, 3 electrons to the p orbitals. That gives us phosphorus. So we have to write the third energy level. We're talking the p orbitals, and we have 3 electrons in the p orbitals. And we got to phosphorus. Let's make sure that adds up to 15 electrons total. I have 2, 4, plus 6 is 10, plus 2 is 12, plus 3 is 15. So sure enough, now you know where all the electrons are for a phosphorus atom. Okay, go ahead and try your assignment.